Hello everybody and welcome to AwesomeEpicGuys with EdvinE20 and Zwhatsh.
Yes, and as everybody else in the World of Tanks community, we have decided to make a little discussion video surrounding the latest 1.13 update of World of Tanks, because apparently it has received mixed opinions at best from the player base.
So me and Zwhatsh, we decided to jump on the bandwagon, and in this video you will hear our controversial hot takes on this nonsense.
We have ranked game mode changes, we have artillery changes, we have AG changes, and a lot more. We know we are a bit late to the scene. We wanted to actually play the game for a while to, get more of an understanding about all the new changes before we jumped into any hard conclusions.
However, we are not gonna milk you for just views and watch time. So we have conveniently placed a bunch of timestamps in the video timeline and also below in the video description.
This video will only be covering our opinions about the 1.13 update. However, we also have an enormous video in the making that will take a deep dive into the history of World of Tanks, discussing both all of its problems, but also all of World of Tanks' benefits. So we hope you are excited for such a video in the future.
To make sure that you don't miss out on such an epic video, you need to do us and yourself a huge favor and simply go down there, so to speak, like and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming video. Before we dive into the topic of World of Tanks 1.13 patch, we would like to inform you that we genuinely are interested in your comments, in your feedback, your opinions, your thoughts, your rants, whatever it is you have to share with us in the comments below.
We try to read every single one of the comments you make, so please go down there and make your voice heard.
I believe we are ready to dive deep into this World of Tanks topic.
Roll the intro.
AwesomeEpicGuys complains about World of Tanks.
Finally, Zwhatsh, the first topic of the video, artillery. It only took Wargaming 10 years, but they finally nerfed the living out of it.
But Edvan, it wasn't really a straight up nerf, was it? It was more of like a rework or a change, or am I wrong here?
Wargaming did many different things to artillery. Probably the main thing is that they gave artillery 3 different shell types, at least the higher tier ones. The lower tier ones have fewer, but generally speaking, you have a normal shell, the splash and stunning shell, which now has a new icon actually.
It's basically the same shell as before the rework.
I believe a change they also made is that it can no longer knock out internal modules or crews. In previous patch, it could literally land next to your tank, do let's say 50 damage and kill 3 out of 4 crewmen. Complete bullshit. So that is out of the window. Now, I believe the most damage it can do, unless it penetrates of course, is it can knock out your tracks and your gun, and I think that's about it. So it can no longer miss you or splash you and take out a bunch of crewmen or modules inside of your tank, which is a nice change. The second shell is the higher damage, high explosive shell, which should be used to shoot single targets that you can reliably hit for more damage. They do however cause crit damage, I think, but they do not do any stunning.
If you are an artillery player and you want to do damage, you should fire this shell, and usually players want to do damage, so this will ultimately lead to stunning being less prevalent in the game.
And the third shell, which is kind of controversial in my opinion, it's either an AP shell or a heat shell, depending on what SPG you're playing. And it's kind of funny, because it was in the game, like, at launch, and it was complete AIDS, and after a long while, they eventually, well, they nerfed it, and then they got rid of it, and now it's back again here. And basically, it works like a normal tank shell, but, fired from a very high arc. So you need to hit and penetrate in order to do damage. So if you miss or bounce or crit, you're not gonna do any damage at all, Zwhatsh.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how we went from like 1850 AP alpha damage on the T92 to...
The AP now does 750. I mean, it still hits like a truck, but I mean, you have gone from one-shotting tier 10 mediums to half-shotting tier 8 heavies. I still don't fully understand why they would remove something because it's cancer and then they bring it back. It's It's Wargaming, I guess. I haven't really used it much myself, and the only times where I've been taking fire from these AP or heat shells, they have all either bounced or been absorbed by my track, so maybe it's not a big issue, at least not yet, unless Wargaming decide to buff them in the future.
So artillery having like different tactical decisions, like different shells, is something we proposed a while back in our How Do We Fix Artillery video. The fact that they have new shells to choose from is very nice in our opinion. One thing that is even more interesting about this is the shells also have different arcs. The old stun shell, it will travel the highest arc, and the secondary AG shell, the high damage one, will travel in a average arc, and the AP shell will travel in the lowest arc. It will have the lowest travel time, and this is also something that we propose in our How Do We Fix Artillery video back in the day.
But at least now they have some decisions to make. The skilled SPG players can divide themselves from the less skilled clickers in a way. First of all, we have the different shells that we just spoke about, but not only do you need to pick the correct shell for the correct target and for the correct timing, but the shell arc also changes how quickly the shell reaches a target. So for example, it might be easier to snipe a moving target with an AP shell, but it's more risky because if you don't hit him like flush, you're not going to do any damage, while the HE and stun shell is going to take a little bit longer to get to the target, but you will probably easier do some damage. And you can also adapt this, for example, if you are shooting over a ridge line or over a bunker or a rock. The stunning shell will have a higher arc, and therefore you will probably have an easier time to splash over that target, as an example. But on the other side, you know that little garage that I like to go under on the ghost town? If you pick the shell with the lowest arc, you might be able to fire through like under bridges and underneath houses and underneath hills a lot easier compared to the previous shells. So yeah, artillery is still kind of bullshit that you can't avoid them easily, but at least it takes a few brain cells to play now.
At least if you find yourself in a tank in such a crammed position and the artillery actually managed to hit you with like an AP shell, you can be like, oh, he actually fired an AP shell. It wasn't just pure RNG that hit me. It was actually a tactical decision from this player that gave him an advantage that I didn't think about. Yes. So now it's not as bullshit, just still a little bit bullshit because he's still firing from across the map. It was at least a tactical decision from that player.
Even if you're gonna take some damage here and there and it feels bullshit, at least you can think, well, at least he did the right choice and he wasn't just lucky. Talking about different shells and making the correct decision, we have a reworked skill / perk in the game. The intuition perk, or skill that it is now, for loaders.
Yeah, it's actually pretty neat. This is actually affecting not only artillery pieces, it's affecting all the tanks in the game. Before this patch, the intuition perk was just kind of a little niche thing that you only picked if you had nothing else to pick, really.
What that perk did is that it created a chance for your tank to reload the correct shell instantly in case you decided to swap.
The percentage, like the chance for this to happen, was so small that it was basically never used. It was basically a useless perk.
Even if you knew you had the intuition perk, and let's say you have an AP or heat shell loaded, and then a weakly armored tank destroyer flies around the corner, you know if you swap to an HE shell, there is a chance that it's gonna instantly swap. But there is also the risk, like pretty high risk, that you're just gonna reload the shell altogether anyway, and it's not worth the risk, it's not worth the trade. So you're just gonna hit him with your AP shell or heat shell, and then you're gonna load an HE shell next. So the only times where the intuition perk kicks in is when you don't need it, because you only take the risk when you have the time to reload the whole shell. So the previous intuition perk was completely useless.
In this patch, they changed this useless skill into an actually useful skill.
The way the new intuition perk work, it's actually kind of simple. If you have a loader in your tank, whether it being a normal tank or an SPG, you can train the intuition perk, and that gives you the ability not to load faster, but to very much faster swap a shell.
Nay! Oh, come on, come on. Why did it ram you?
Why did you ram a heavy tank? You know what? I'm actually gonna load armor piercing because I want to save some credits. Look at that.
It's been watching too many AwesomeEpicGuys videos.
So let's say you are sitting in your SPG, you have, let's say, an AP shell loaded, and then like 4 juicy heavy tanks appear right next to each other on an open map. You're like, oh god, I can splash all of those. Too bad I have a 40-second reload and the wrong shell loaded. But if you have the intuition perk now, you can very quickly swap to a different shell, and this applies to other tanks as well. I don't remember the exact percentage, and it also stacks with things like Brothers in Arms and ventilation and food and things like that, but it becomes so quickly, it becomes so fast that like it's gonna swap shell, you know, faster than you can turn your gun and aim. So it's basically an insta swap, which is very nice because again, you can actually make tactical decisions and load the correct shell at the correct time. But with most things that Wargaming do in their updates, you know, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, a major flaw that I quickly found out with this new loader skill is that, how do I put this in a way that you can all understand? So for example, I retrained the loader in my Super Conqueror for ranked. So I gave the Super Conqueror intuition. This gave me a bunch of options because this meant that, for example, usually you spam a lot of gold in rank, for example. If I got into a position, let's say I got behind or sideways of a medium tank and I knew that I don't need APCR, that's just gonna be a waste of cash, I could just instantly swap to an armor piercing shell in like 1.6 seconds, which is, in World of Tanks terms, it's basically instantly. And also, if I find myself in a hold down duel against another Super Conqueror or an STB or whatever, and I know that I can't damage this guy, there's no way, I can just instantly swap to a Hesh shell and splash him in the weak spot or in the gun for maybe 50 damage. I know they nerfed HE, but at least it's something, right? However, this loader skill, intuition, you will only get a percentage increased in reload swap depending on how many loaders you have. So you would think that if you have more loaders with the intuition perk on your tank, it would swap shells even faster. But this is Wargaming. As long as you have 1 loader per tank, and maybe you have 1 loader in your premium equivalent tank, let's say if I move this thing to the Narven, I'm not sure, I think that thing only has 1 loader, it's gonna work flawlessly back and forth. But the moment you put the same crew in a tank that has more loaders, for example an auto loader, this is something I noticed very quickly with tanks like this one, for example. This tank has 2 loaders, the commander and the gunner, which are already under a lot of pressure. So let's say that this crew came from the UDES, which I believe does. You have it trained on 1 loader and it works flawlessly in the UDES or whichever other tank it is, and then you put it in a premium tank that for some reason has 2 loaders, which is quite common. I believe some of the Frenchies have like 3 out of 4 loaders in a tank. Then you will lose X percentage of that skill unless you have it trained on everyone. So if you have 2 loaders and only one of them has the intuition perk, you lose 50% of the perk. But the moment you take the crew back to the original tank or a different tank with only 1 loader, all of a sudden you have 100% effectiveness of the skill.
This means that 2 people doing the same thing is apparently less effective than 1 person doing the same thing.
And Wargaming's response to this, because it's a skill, they wanted to take the same approach as with, let's say, concealment and repairs, that you will get the combined percentage. For example, if you have, if it's a small tank, let's say it's a light tank, you have 2 crew in it and you have both of them with repairs, that is gonna repair as fast as, let's say, a mouse or an E100, where all of them have repairs, because combined it's 100% repair if they all have repairs trained, blah 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 blah. But the key difference here is that this is a loader exclusive skill.
The easiest fix to this, make the skill into a perk and only require you to have said perk on only 1 of your loaders on your crew.
Because World of Tanks is so old, there are so many tanks, a lot of people have a bunch of premium tanks, and it basically destroys the perk if you take your same crew and put him in a tank with multiple loaders. And I think that's a damn shame, because I don't want to retrain my crew or reset my crew skills every time I play a different premium. That is just silly.
So, after that intuition rant baked into this artillery topic, let's go back to the artillery topic.
We have new, bigger, brighter shell traces where they freaking look like meteor strikes. It actually looks quite beautiful in the battlefield, if you ask me.
Shell tracers is actually not a new feature to World of Tanks. It has actually been in the game for as long as I can remember. But the thing is that the shell tracers have been pretty inconsistent. Some patches the shell tracers have been really obvious, like these large white lines through the air. Sometimes they have not even been there. But it seems like as Wargaming finally put on their pants and actually made shell traces like a consistent mechanic in a game that you can use. As when you see one of those big ass meteors flying through the air, you can see where the artillery piece is hiding. You can adapt your positions to, reposition yourself to avoid the next shell. And you can hear the shell when it comes nearby. It looks nice, and you can adapt your positioning to avoid the shells, which is very nice.
And this also ties into artillery players having to use their brains, and it actually increases the skill cap for artillery players, at least in our opinion. One of the things that people dislike so heavily about artillery is that they just sit on their ass in base and click people. And most people are probably still doing that playing artillery. But after the new shell traces or shell meteors, whatever you want to call them, it becomes very obvious where you are sitting. It's not pinpoint accurate. This is something that we criticize Wargaming for, that we believe that the shell traces should be 100% accurate to encourage more artillery versus artillery combat. But now it spawns like a bit randomly, like either in front or behind the SPG. It's a bit hard to describe. You will still get a very good idea of where the enemy artillery is. So if you are doing counter battery fire, it is very easy to track down the enemy artillery and shoot him back, which encourages Arty to Arty gameplay, which is nice. And it also encourages the artillery players to actually move a little bit after every shell and not just sit on your ass and click for the whole game. So it increases the skill cap because you will be able to counter the enemy artillery pieces, but it will also punish the lazy ones if they don't move, if the enemy artillery is paying attention. I don't think Wargaming care much about what me and Zwhatsh say, but something that I would heavily encourage Wargaming to change about this is to make the spawn of the shell tracer 100% accurate. Make it spawn from the gun barrel of the SPG to encourage artillery versus artillery gameplay, because I honestly think not only is that going to be more fair against the tankers, but it's also gonna encourage, more active SPG skill-based gameplay. And if I'm playing my SPG, I almost never do, but let's say that I for some reason decide to play artillery and I do counter battery fire and the enemy doesn't move, I don't wanna miss him over and over again because the game is giving me false indications to where he is.
Rewarding artillery for skillful play should be something that Wargaming wants to do, and this shell tracer that's not accurately appearing above the artillery piece is kind of going against that.
And another change to SPGs, well, all tanks really, and thank God you don't need a freaking skill or perk for it, is the new artillery hit circle.
If an enemy artillery fires and the shell lands somewhere on the map, you will see exactly where the shell impacted on your little interface map. A little orange circle will appear, which is very helpful for letting you know that, okay, the artillery is reloading right now, you can make an advance or push or whatever, or at least not expect any more artillery shells for a while. With the new shell tracers, you can usually figure out where he is. Thanks to them, if you're on a map where you cannot see this, you can use the new hit markers on the map to maybe figure out where he is anyways.
This is something that I don't think many people have thought about, but I think that the shell tracers that we just spoke about and the new artillery landing circle or hit circle, they kind of tie together, because if you are a skilled SPG player and let's say you are watching over a somewhat obvious area where the enemy artillery is usually sitting, a frustrating thing when you are doing counter battery fire is that you won't necessarily know, maybe he's sitting right underneath you and you're just blinking at the moment that he fired or whatever, but now when you have these circles on the map, you will know if the enemy artillery has just fired. So let's say you're watching over an obvious position on a map in your SPG and you haven't seen anything for like 30 seconds, but you see a yellow circle on the map, you will know like, oh, he just fired and I didn't see anything. Well, then you can come to the conclusion that he is not sitting exactly where you're looking, which I think is fantastic, because otherwise, like in Clan Wars, people might say like, oh, artillery fired, but that's not gonna happen in random games, so that gives you a very good tool. Not only that, but with this circle, you might be able to tell, as Zwhatsh just said, where the enemy artillery is sitting. And I just love, because all of these new tools, hand in hand, creates more depth when you play artillery, and I absolutely love it.
Another tool is the new sound detection perk that Wargaming has introduced in this patch.
A new perk that is called sound detection, and it's more or less an artillery sixth sense.
Didn't think about it.
Nej! Ah! Artillery sixth sense! F you already have artillery sixth sense! You will not hit me! Go f yourself!
T95 is still alive. I'm gonna try and...
No!
Don't dead.
Arty!
Don't dead the one.
Sixth sense! for Arty, the best thing Wargaming has ever introduced into this game. I love you, Wargaming. Please take my wallet. And this is something that players have been asking for 10 years, Wargaming. But finally, it is here. And I do think that when you have it and when it works and all that shit, it is a fantastic tool. However, it is not as overpowered as a lot of people think it is, because it really only works if you have, you know, enough time to move and if you're in a quick enough tank. If you're a mouse on the hill of Malinovka and if you have this perk, it's probably not gonna help you very much. But let's say that the artillery is standing far away, maybe he has 3 or 4 seconds for a shell to arrive, and you are driving a somewhat quick tank, maybe you're peeking over a ridgeline, you see this indicator going off, you might be able to quickly dodge it, and I think this is fantastic. And this can also introduce, as more and more players slowly train this perk, it will create this mind game with artillery players where they might predict that an enemy tank has this perk, where he might fire at him once, he sees that he dodges, and he'd be like, oh, he maybe has that perk. And then maybe next time he might intentionally land the shell in front or behind him, because he knows that the enemy tank has the perk and he's gonna fall back when he gets the warning, and that way you will be able to score direct hits anyway. Again, more depth to the game. And again, as I said previously with Wargaming, with all these fantastic changes, 2 steps forwards and 1 step back. What do you mean, Edward? What is the step back on this one? It's a commander perk. I believe that the sound detection perk was intended to be a 6th Sense replacement. 6th Sense was planned to become a default perk for all tanks, and I believe they already have this in World of Tanks Blitz. Basically, the only good thing about Crew 2.0 was that 6th Sense would basically become a free skill perk.
It would be a default mechanic of the game.
So what I suspect Wargaming are thinking here is that, oh no, if we remove 6th Sense, people will have a free slot on all their commanders, and we don't want that. And then they introduced the sound detection perk. So it's not a replacement for 6th Sense, it's supposed to replace the slot for all the commanders, because they don't want to give people free stuff. However, Crew 2.0 didn't happen. Probably won't happen for a long time into the future. So now they are just throwing this great perk into the game as a commander perk. The commander, which is under so much pressure in this game. As an example, you probably want Brothers in Arms, you want 6th Sense, you want Recon and situational awareness. You probably want stuff like repairs. If you're really unlucky, like this one is a loader, you might want stuff like safe storage. If you're not a heavy tank, maybe you're a medium or a light, you might want stuff like camouflage. You see how all these things start to stack up, and then you want to squeeze in the sound detection perk into all that. Bruh. We believe that the sound detection perk should have simply been, at least for now, included into the game as a default game feature. And if Wargaming are not gonna do that, at least include it in 6th Sense. So make 6th Sense and the sound detection basically the same thing, because now you have the situation where you have introduced a fantastic feature into the game that most people won't use because they need to train it. And most people might have 4 or 5 skills or perks on their commanders, and to train the next one might take, you know, a week of gameplay, unless they have like books and shit, and then you need to realize that they might have 100 tanks in their garage. It's gonna be years until the sound detection perk becomes default. The only people now who use it are people like me and Zwhatsh with too much gold, who are basically just resetting every commander and sacrificing a perk, like maybe Recon, for example, or repairs, because you need to make that conscious decision. For example, now on my Emil, I have sacrificed repairs.
The sound detection perk as a feature is very good, but the thing is, it's pretty situational. Not every game is gonna contain artillery pieces. So it's a very useful thing that you will want to have in those games with artillery. But at the same time, you probably want to have a more useful skill like Recon or 6th Sense if you don't have enough slots, because those things are more useful in all battles. So this sound detection perk is something you want to have when it's relevant, but might not be something you want to choose over 6th Sense or Recon. So it should just be a built-in function to the game.
It may actually be confusing with artillery players as well, because when they're shooting at people, they have no idea if that dude has the perk or not. It would make so much more sense if everyone just got it, because now if you keep missing with your artillery because the enemy tank keeps moving back and forth, you don't know if he's just moving around like a headless chicken because he's stupid, or if he's actually using skill and his sound detection perk. You won't know.
On a more positive note though, M44 is finally balanced.
This is the high splash shell. Come on. Come on, game. Come on. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. The M44 is dead.
Our entire team is just sitting on 2-line.
This is why I have this map blacklisted.
I'm gonna
Direct hit
attempt...
in the broadside of a heavy 140 damage. 8 damage. I hit right next to him. I'm so happy, Zwhatsh. Compared to the previous M44 that I played, this was one of the most underwhelming experiences ever. What a splash did previously, I now achieve on a direct hit. And if I miss, I do practically nothing. And that's with the high splash shell. I fired 19 shots, 3 direct hits on Prokhorovka. The game lasted for 7 minutes and I did 600 damage. In my opinion, the M44 is probably the most game-breaking tank in the game. Well, there are more game-breaking tanks, but not in these high numbers. You could say that the Chieftain is bullshit, the 279E is bullshit, the Lef is bullshit, a lot of bullshit tanks. But if you play tier 5, 6, 7, and even to some degree tier 8, the M44 is f***ing everywhere, or at least it used to be. If you were playing tier 6, you were happy if there were not 6 of these in your game. This SPG basically had everything. It had reload, damage, pen, it had shell arc, gun arc, it made credits. This SPG didn't have any downsides at all. It was absolutely game breaking. Even one of them can be annoying, and having 3 of them per side was a complete and utter shit show. And this is the only SPG we believe, by looking at the patch notes, that got a direct nerf. We don't have any numbers, we haven't played the game that much because both of us have kind of been on like summer holidays during this patch launch, but it really feels like artillery as a whole got some kind of like behind the scenes nerf, and we're not sure what it is because we did not get this impression on the sandbox or on the global test. We thought that this would be a change, as we were just talking about, where artillery players now have to use their brains a little bit. It's still gonna be AIDS and bullshit and crap, but at least they have to use their brains a little bit. And I was also kind of against the AP shells because like, I don't want to get hit by 600 every 15 seconds by M44. That's gonna be quite bullshit, lol. We're not sure what they did, but the overall effectiveness of artillery has dropped like dramatically, unless you are really lucky. I've seen some replays of people firing armor-piercing shells with some of the higher tier artists, and they connect shell after shell after shell, and obviously the damage is gonna stack up pretty quickly. But generally speaking, when people just load whatever shell they feel like, usually the stunning shell or the normal HE shell, it just seems to do so little damage, like to a point where you almost feel bad for artillery players. And it is really hard for me and Zwhatsh to stay unbiased, because both me and Zwhatsh absolutely hate and despise artillery, and any nerf to them we will praise, because we are selfish
There are a reason I have 0 games in artillery.
Obviously this patch, even when we are recording this video like 2 weeks after launch almost, there are a lot of complaints coming in from artillery players, and most of them are saying the same thing, that artillery got nerfed very hard, and the class, it's not useless, but it's nothing of its former self. And I even heard some, I don't remember his name, and he claimed that artillery has become almost useless, even in Clan Wars, which was basically the only game mode, in my opinion, where artillery made a little bit of sense. Because in Clan Wars, a lot of the time there's one team assaulting another, and then when one team is defending a base, they usually just stack a bunch of heavy tanks, like hold down like Chieftains, 279Es, around the base in strong positions, and previously the only way to prevent that was to just splash them for 10 minutes straight with artillery and then push in when they were on low enough hit points, and now you can't do that anymore. However, we don't play much Clan Wars, and we haven't watched much Clan Wars, so we can't really say if this is true or not. But from our experience just playing random battles, I can't see how that would be far from the truth, because unless artillery scores direct hits, they don't do very much anymore. And this leads to our probably biggest complaint slash feedback to Wargaming. I've heard this argument from basically every corner of the World of Tanks community by now, but we also believe that this entire change, it's nice if you dislike artillery. You will take less damage, you will have new tools to your disposal. However, this has been in the making for I don't know how long, I don't know how much resources Wargaming put into this project, but most people seem to agree that it would have just been so much easier to simply reduce the artillery players in the game. So currently they are limited to 3, to try and limit them to 2, or maybe even 1.
They could have just made this simple fix instead of reworking the entire system. That would have been just more effective and taken a lot less resources.
The main counter argument when you bring up these, oh, you need to limit them in the matchmaker, it's always the argument that it takes too long and it's too tricky for the matchmaker to find games quickly, because I believe that finding games fast is Wargaming's top priority. It has always been. And it's probably one of the key reasons I started playing this game. However, if artillery players would find themselves in longer queues, which is probably true if they were to just straight up reduce the number of stuff, let's say that they reduce the cap from 3 to let's say 2 or even 1. If the queues would become just too long for artillery players, well, the next fix that a lot of people have been talking about would simply be to either change or remove completely the current artillery missions in the game. Because a lot of people, obviously we don't have any numbers to back this up, but a lot of people at least claim that the only reason they play artillery is to complete missions. And I am one of those. I have unlocked all artilleries in the game and I did it to achieve the 260 and the 279E. And if you would somehow remove those missions or rework them somehow so that you don't have to play artillery to complete them, for example, you Zwhatsh have been stuck on your missions for ages because you don't play artillery. But if you were to remove them completely or rework them somehow, then only the Jeffs, the Andys, who play nothing but artillery, then the matchmaker would only have to deal with them and not the additional X% of people who are just spamming games in artillery to try and get that one magic game where they can achieve a mission. It's just rolling a dice, and especially when you play tanks like you're doing scout missions or splash missions, you're just waiting for that perfect game on the correct map, with the correct matchmaking, with the correct teammates, with the correct retards on the enemy team. So you might need to play, 100 games to achieve one stupid missions. And so if the missions were just moved out of the way or reduced somehow, that would probably solve the queue time issues. Imagine you have 10 missions completed or 15 or whatever, then obviously Wargaming need to compensate that somehow. That's completely up to Wargaming, but I believe that would at least been a way easier approach of dealing with the problem. They could have probably done that in just a couple of weeks, instead of doing this extremely complicated, convoluted rework that in the end seems to be just a straight up nerf.
Speaking of artillery missions, I think we can all agree that artillery generally has received a nerf this patch. If you were doing the artillery missions before the patch and are currently trying to do them, I think you're pretty much f***ed, because they are, at this point in time, just too difficult to accomplish, really. As most of the missions are based on stunning, and the stunning shells are pretty much getting just a direct nerf. Completing them seems to be not very possible at the moment. I mean, they probably are, but you're gonna have to grind like a freaking jackass to do them. And since people usually only play artillery to play missions, all these new tactical tools that Wargaming have implemented for artillery in this patch pretty much become irrelevant, because you're only firing the stun rounds, which now are nerfed, but you're still doing the same missions. Only reason we can come up to why they haven't changed the missions is because they want to collect data before they do literally anything in this game, so...
But obviously it would be more wise, Wargaming, if you basically got rid of the missions and somehow compensated the players who have progress in those missions. Just say. And we don't want an entire class that people may have worked for years to unlock all of them to be just rendered useless. Like, I can be fine with Wargaming nerfing, I don't know, Type 5 Heavy or the 27, the Foch, and the removal of the Waffen trigger, but you have basically killed almost all the SPGs in the game in one go. No matter how hard you nerf them, that's another argument, no matter how hard you nerf them, there's still 3 of them per team a lot of the time. And no matter how hard you nerf them, 3 will always be too many.
The thing about the missions as well, since many players only play artillery for the missions, the thing that happens then is that they go on the forums and they ask which artillery piece is the best one to do the missions. And the answers will usually be the same, so what happens here is that all players play the same artillery pieces, the one that is usually effective to do the missions. So it really hurts the artillery dynamic as well. You only see the same few artillery pieces over and over because they're playing the best one just to complete the missions.
I've been saying this for at least a few years now. Artillery class as a whole, like on average, is quite underwhelming to play. Unless you are like extremely good and maybe you have like a good platoon mate and such, getting a high win rate, let's say achieving a 60% win rate playing a tier 10 SPG solo queue is almost impossible because your impact is so low. The result, as Zwhatsh was just talking about, is that a lot of people, not only because of missions but because they just want to have fun, is that most players, they just play the same couple of tanks. So maybe, let's say 80% of the SPGs in World of Tanks before this update was kind of meh or underwhelming to play. Didn't matter, because everyone was just sitting in those top 20% SPGs over and over and over. Great example being the M44. And now most SPGs have received some kind of nerf or splash reduction, so tanks that were meh before the update are now utterly useless.
Well, there is one or two they haven't touched. The Lef and the Sexton.
Now we can't nerf premium, Zwhatsh! What are you mad?
So I guess
can't possibly nerf a premium.
So if you wanna do the missions,
my precious premium. Overall, me and Zwhatsh personally, we love the changes because it is a indirect nerf to basically all of them and we don't like artillery. However, we believe that it was a bit unnecessary to have this super complicated rework when you could have really just adjusted the matchmaker to 1 or 2 per side and removed the missions. I think that seems like the more logical approach. That's the feedback that people have been giving you for years. Well, that's basically what we think of the artillery changes. Don't you agree, Zwhatsh?
yes. Next topic is high explosive.
They have been trying or wishing really hard to change shell types, just a lot of different types of ammunition for a long time now. And at least for me and Zwhatsh, seemingly out of nowhere, they just decided to nerf / change / rework high explosives, which is kind of a meme shell here at AwesomeEpicGuys. I think the biggest misconception that we hear online now is that a lot of people are not referring these changes as changes, but as a direct nerf. Everyone says, oh, HE got nerfed, oh, why did they nerf HE? And I would say as a whole, yeah, it's kind of a nerf, but it's more of a change. It's a bit of a double-edged sword in a way.
In comparison to artillery, which was pretty much a nerf, this one is more of a change, actually.
First of all, the new HE mechanic that we're talking about here does not affect artillery. That's another thing that's confused a lot of people, is that the new HE changes are for tanks. From what we understand, the problem that Wargaming tried to solve was the brain-dead spam use and randomness of HE shells. For example, they had a little promotion video on the YouTube channel not too long ago where you were playing an E100, you start side scraping, you position yourself perfectly, and then around the corner there are 3 shit barns who just splash you in the face and you're dead. And we do agree that just splashing super heavies, or any tank for that matter, just in the face with a stupid HE round and do a little bit of damage, it's kind of silly when you really think about it. Me and Zwhatsh personally, this has never ever, I think, bothered us, and we haven't really heard that many people, some people but not many, that think that it bothers them either. Like, I don't know about you, Zwhatsh, but I'd much rather take 50 splash damage in the face than a full 400 penetrating shell, but maybe that's just me. The main thing that Wargaming were going for here is that they wanted to make our HE more consistent. Previously, and it still kind of is, I'm not sure if it's fully fleshed out yet, but previously it was very random. For example, you might be playing your KV2, you shoot at a hull down heavy tank right in the face, it might do literally 0 damage because, I don't know. And then the next shell, you do 400 splash and set him on fire and he dies. Because previously, when you hit someone with high explosive with a tank and still with artillery, the game creates a sphere, the splash radius, around that shell, and then it tries to find the weakest part of the armor, then it tries to do damage there. That is how you got these moments where, for example, you hit a mouse, is probably the best example that I can think of. You can hit a mouse in the front of the turret with a weak HE shell, but if the splash radius is strong enough or big enough, it's gonna splash down to the engine deck because that's the weakest part, and then you can just set a mouse on fire frontally, and that is really stupid. It was also another example of you could penetrate the cupola of a Conqueror or Super Conqueror.
Slash the cupola of a Super Conqueror.
And the sphere would spread down and penetrate the engine deck. Like, it's so super silly. Me and Zwhatsh, this hasn't really bothered us that much. It's just been part of like the funny RNG aspect of World of Tanks. We understand what Wargaming are working against. They're trying to remove some of the random bullshit.
The new changed HE in comparison to the old HE. The old HE created a sphere on impact, found the weakest armor and did damage there. The new HE finds an armor plate and tries to penetrate on impact just like any other shell. It makes sense, like mechanically, yeah, it makes sense, you know, why would it work any other way, like, you know? In that regard, it's, you know, it's more mechanically consistent, it makes sense, yeah, we get it. You want to have things that make sense in the game. But this also results in, like, some shells literally just doing 0 damage, and it's supposed to work that way. It's not just random 0, it's just supposed to do 0 because the armor is just too goddamn thick.
For example, in the previous update, if you were playing, I think one of the best examples probably like a shit barn, you loaded Hesh, and then in front of you was a hold down chieftain. You could just shoot him straight in the face and maybe splash him for 600. Boom! With the new update, you might do 0. In most people's eyes, this is a nerf, and you would be correct. Because I believe Wargaming are trying to work against, you know, brainless HE spam of armor, because they want you to, if you're driving an armored tank, no matter what it is, it shouldn't be easily countered by HE. So what they have done now is that HE, as Zwhatsh was talking about, it does damage upon impact. And this is where we believe this is more of a change more than a direct nerf. So if you are a big fan like me, Zwhatsh, big fan of tanks like the KV2, maybe tanks like, you know, spamming HE in the 60 TP is always kind of fun, right? Maybe tanks like the Type 5 Heavy. Slow HE derp tanks with bad accuracy, some low pen as well. To those tanks, if you like to spam HE in those, this is more or less a direct nerf. Which is also why some of them even got buffed in other stats after this update. The KV2 got a slight buff here and there to kind of make up for it. However, I think this is where a lot of people are missing out, is that if you are playing other types of HE tanks, I think the best ones that I can come up with just on the top of my head are the British ones with Hesh, for example, the Centurion 7-1, or maybe the Conway, for example. So they have like accurate, somewhat fast-firing Hesh rounds or HE rounds. To those types of tanks, this change is more of a buff. For example, in the previous update, you might fly around, you know, a thick boy, a heavy tank or a medium tank. You have your HE shell loaded. You're like, oh, perfect! I loaded the correct shell for the situation. You blast him in the side, and it splashes him for 50 when you expected like a 500 HE pen, because HE was getting eaten by tracks, spaced armor, and all that shit. Now, high explosives continues, it will have an easier time to penetrate stuff like tracks. It does lose penetration when you're penetrating targets, you know, like an AP shell, for example, APCR. But for example, if you flank around a medium or a heavy tank in your Centurion 7-1 as an example, this is a buff, because you will more consistently be able to penetrate the side if you have enough pen, that is, and if you hit him at the right spot.
Before, HE would just disappear when it hit obstructables and spaced armor, but now the HE rounds can actually penetrate through spaced armor, just like AP and APCR.
If there's like a Leopard or a thinly armored tank destroyer, as example, standing around the other side of a wall, in the previous update, you wouldn't be able to fire through the wall and then damage him, but now you can. And that is also a buff, in a way, to HE. I personally don't think it makes much sense, because we're so used to HE and heat to detonate upon impact. I mean, that's gonna take years to reprogram, but it is a buff nonetheless. They have also kept the feature where you can like use HE to destroy buildings and fences and stuff. You can even still use it to knock down trees, which is nice. However, Zwhatsh, you want to talk about the splashing? That's kind of your thing.
A really neat thing that you could do with high explosive before this rework was that you could like shoot beneath, like under a tank, splash the underside of a vehicle's floor. You can like splash an HE round under a super heavy tank and actually do damage to them. Or if you even had the penetration but you didn't have lines of fire on a vehicle, you could like splash the HE round around a corner and still hit them without actually having a direct line of sight on them.
Like artillery still work.
Yeah, so splashing shells, you know, in specific scenarios were like a little neat tactical thing that you could do. It was fun and exciting. You were like, oh shit, okay, here we have a situation where I can actually splash this guy. Look at his pro gamer move right here, lads, and you would just, you know, do that thing, splash them around the corner, and it was a super fun thing to do. Before, when the shell, the HE shell hit the ground, it was create a sphere, and it would look for armor in that sphere. Now, in the new update, when the shell, high explosive shell hits the ground, it will try and penetrate the ground like if it was armor or something, and then it would just disappear because there's nothing to pen there.
Yeah, and that is something that confuses me a little bit. Like, it can penetrate certain objects, but others it cannot. Like, how does the shell know that you're penetrating a screen or a fence or the ground? Because these are just things you're gonna have to learn. It's not gonna make that much sense. However, it will be more consistent in the long run. One of the major downsides and complaints that we have from these HE changes, and I do agree mainly, is that the old HE was kind of like a last resort shell or a poor man's premium ammo, you know. So for example, you're sitting hold down, or you're defending like a corner or whatever, and then a super heavily armored tank, maybe 2 tiers higher than you, starts side scraping or is sitting hold down, and you just cannot, for the love of God, damage him. If you swap to HE, you're not gonna kill the guy. But instead of bouncing straight off him, you might do 50 or maybe 100 damage. If he decides to sit there, you might be able to shoot some HP off, or at least, which is what usually happens, is that you force the enemy to relocate or to push you or do something instead of just sitting there. So this patch has directly resulted in just even more premium ammo spam, because in a previous situation where some people might think, that's a tricky target, I just shoot some HE at him. Now they can't do that anymore, and they're just gonna have to either, not damage the guy and get away, or load even more premium ammo.
We personally, here at AwesomeEpicGuys, we have never really found HE to be a problem. It has been a little neat joker card you can pull once in a while, or a desperate solution to a hold down situation. These new changes to HE, we find them to make sense if Wargaming are gonna pull through with more changes in the future. For example, these hold down situations that Edwin talked about, where you can basically only do damage to a tank by spamming high explosive. In this situation they have nerfed now with a new reworked HE. We think this change makes sense if they are actually gonna address those hold down situations.
Not just hold down, you could be side scraping or just driving a defender top tier, doesn't really matter, it doesn't have to be hold down.
If they're gonna address the general armor profiles of the game, because we think the armor profiles of most vehicles in the game have become very stale. Impenetrable turret, weak hull, which means they're gonna go hold down and become impenetrable in that hold down situation, where basically only high explosive can damage them, and this makes these HE changes not make sense, but it would make sense if they're actually gonna address these armor profiles of tanks, basically.
We feel that HE has become a problem for some people because of the armor problems, and one problem leads to the next, and Wargaming now have only addressed one, and in our perfect world they would have addressed both at the same time. And I really hope that Wargaming have something in store for us in the somewhat near future to kind of address this, but I don't see how it's gonna happen, because like there's so many freaking meta tanks in this game now with hold down turrets and shit. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but I just feel now you will be more encouraged than ever to bring out tanks like the Chieftain and the 279E, or basically any meta armor tanks that can just find some cover and be immortal, because previously the only way you could damage them more or less was to either YOLO them like a retard or to spam HE in their face. And now the HE spam in your face option is no longer an option. And even more so now with artillery nerfed as well. Like, this is probably the best day or best period in World of Tanks history to play an overpowered hold down reward tank.
Yep.
We would, however, like to add the point. Perhaps you need to do some oversight to some of the vehicles that got heavily affected by this nerf, or change, I should say. I'm mainly talking about tanks that have like derp-oriented gameplay, mainly tanks that have like low pen, low mobility, low accuracy.
The most important one is basically the KV2R, because that thing only has the derp. Well, the tech tree version can at least have the 107 if you want to go with that one.
Then we have the Japanese heavy tanks. There are a lot of tanks in this game, is my point, that have derp-oriented gameplay that people either bought as a premium or grind it out to have the privilege of basically derping when they get bored. Same way me and Zwhatsh, why we play the KV2 sometimes on stream. You did buff tanks like the KV2, like a little bit of gun handling, like a little bit of engine power, stuff like that. But the charm of the KV2 was always the HE shells. And we did try it on stream a while ago when the patch was live, and it was horrendously wanky, inconsistent to say the least. Like, you could hit someone, you know, you can pen them for 1000 with HE, and the next 4 rounds you do literally no damage at all. Then you load AP, and then you miss, and then you bounce, and then you crit, and then you freaking one-shot the next guy. The results are all over the place. And if you are playing a tank like, for example, the KV2, could be any other derp tank, and you fight a tank that is 2 tiers higher than you can just go yourself, okay? If a defender charged you in your KV2, you can at least blow his tracks off and do maybe 250 damage with HE. Now you have nothing. You're practically worthless. This is another major flaw with World of Tanks plus the matchmaking. We're not going to talk about that much in this little video. That might be for the future, and who knows. But we would suggest that you at least give these tanks a little bit of love. You analyze your data for 6 months. A buff to the KV2, or at least a premium version, would be to give it the old heat shell back, as an example. Give it something that is inconsistent but at least has the penetration potential to go through some armored tanks. And you can obviously apply the same strategy to other tanks. Maybe give them more or better shell types would be a great idea. Point is, you need to show some love to derp-based oriented tanks.
General conclusion about the high explosive shells are, it's more of a change rather than a nerf. Some tanks really benefit from these changes. It's more consistent, you know, it's mechanically more logical on how it works. But at the same time, a lot of tanks, more derp-oriented tanks, have become subpar. You can't splash things anymore. Hull-down tanks are more stronger. You know, the hull-down meta is stronger. You have to spend more premium to get through these tanks. So unless you want to address those armored problems, we don't think the high explosive was very logical. But if you want to address these armored problems, we think the high explosive changes are pretty good.
The reason why the HE spam has become so prevalent these last couple of years is not because people are more brain dead and spam HE because it's easy damage. It's because they have no other option, because there are so many tanks that cannot be damaged no matter what you shoot at them. That is the problem, in our opinion, not HE in of itself.
The next topic is ranked. Everybody's favorite game mode.
We just love making fun of ranked because it is such a shit show. They tried to spice things up a little bit, so they had a test season during the summer vacation. That was only 2 weeks, which is already kind of a brain dead move in my opinion, because people are on vacation, goddammit. But beside that, it was the same mode but different formats. So previously there was 15 versus 15, and there were, I believe, just 1 EBR per side. I could be wrong, or at least the same amount per side, and 2 artillery. Now they remade the whole damn thing and made it 10 versus 10, 1 EBR and 1 artillery max per side. And then obviously the chevron system was reworked a little bit to accommodate the new rewards, basically. I did manage to play through the whole way. My first impressions just playing, you know, 1 test season or whatever you want to call it in just a few days. I believe that 10 versus 10 was a lot better than 15 versus 15, mainly because it was less of a shit show. It was less punishing to peek or to make dangerous plays. The map opened up so much more if you were a fast tank, just like the 7 versus 7, very similar to that.
It reduced the shitstorm, as we said in our tier 10 is bad video, which you can also watch if you press the little thingy around here somewhere.
It also gives you as a player more of an impact, because now you are 10% of your entire team. There were so many more games where like 1 or 2 players won the game because they made a correct play or they carried, because there are just less players around. The less players on the battlefield, the more impact each and every player has, which means that this mode will generally benefit good players and punish bad players, because if you're bad, the chances of you getting carried will be less, but if you're good, the opportunities to carry will be a lot more frequent, if that makes any sense. However, that is a little bit of a double-edged sword as well, because something I did notice was that, yes, you as an individual player have more of an impact, so if you're good, you might on average win a little bit more, but also something that I noticed very quickly is that if you get like 2 morons on your team, like HP boosted 50Bs who camp at the back, you're basically lost straight away. Because most games in 10v10, even though the lineup like skill-wise and tank-wise and spawn-wise are like perfectly balanced, you are still getting these 10-0 ruffle stomps like all the time back and forth. And the reason because of that is not because one team is just a bunch of idiots and the other teams are super good, the less people that are in play, the easier it is to get the domino effect going. So if 1 or 2 players are either just having a bad day, they have bad RNG, they make one little stupid peek and they get punished for it, bam! The snowball effect has started, and the other team have an HP or gun advantage, and then it will become even easier to kill the next tank and the tank after that. So even though teams might be perfectly balanced, which they were a lot of the time, you will still have these 10, 0, 2, 3 minute ruffle stomps, which could get quite annoying at times, because you know, the game starts, you look at the map and be like, oh, we have 3 people that go to the city, what are you guys doing? And then the other team, all 10 of those, they stick together and they make a strong push. And it doesn't matter how good you are, if there's 7 of you and 10 of them, you can't win, because in World of Tanks you have things like DPM and hit point. It works both ways. During my 20 games of qualifications, there was an artillery piece per side in almost every game, but beyond qualifications, you know, from 3rd division to leagues, that entire grind, I believe I were in maybe 5 games where there was an artillery. Artillery is more or less dead in ranked, which I think is fantastic, because I don't believe such an RNG based bullshit AIDS class should be in a skill-based game. So that is a very nice change. And on top of that, because there are less artillery players and just less gamers in general in the same game, that is also an indirect nerf to the EBRs, because if they spot you, there's probably no artillery to shoot you, and even if there are some tank destroyers to shoot you, you might just be 1 and not 2 or 3. So it is an indirect nerf to both of the bullshit classes. However, the gameplay you tend to see, especially in the higher leagues like, you know, 1st division and inside the leagues, is that most people are either playing, well, still EBRs. Burst mediums are very common, like the Progetto and the TVP, but mainly the STB1, Kranvagn and Super Conquerors are very common, because they have hit points, armor, burst damage, gun depression, turret armor, basically all the stuff you need. The Super Conqueror might lack a little bit in mobility, but you still see a lot of the same tanks. I think Kranvagn is the most popular tank in ranked, at least this season that I've saw. I've been in games where there have been 6 Kranvagns per side, and also seen games with like 6 STB1s per side. So that is lame, but at the same time there will always be a meta tank, or they meta tanks. And a lot of people are making the complaint like, yeah, you guys removed the chieftains and now we have nothing but Kranvagns on both sides. Yeah, that is true.
I guess the argument here is remove the Kranvagns because they're so meta, they're too overpowered. But if you remove the Kranvagns, there's probably gonna be another tank next in line that's just the meta tank under the Kranvagn. And if you remove that tank, there's gonna be something else below that. And the list goes on until you have, I guess, nothing left to play. At some point you're gonna have to just accept that there's the meta tanks. I guess the only solution to this is make like more meta tanks. That's another topic in of itself, so we're gonna talk about that another time. The difference between the Kranvagns and the chieftains here is that you can actually get the Kranvagn in comparison to the chieftains or other reward tanks. Everybody at least has a fair shot of getting this tank, and also has a fair game against each other in that regard. As a chieftain, it's an impossible tank to get, so it gives those players kind of an unfair advantage.
It sucks, but it is what it is, and it could have been a lot worse. And you can't make the argument, but he's doing better because he has the Kranvagn. Well, shut up, you can get the Kranvagn too. They made the overall grind in chevrons a bit shorter, because this was a test season that lasted 2 weeks instead of the normal like 3 or 4 or how long it is. But they still had 20 qualification battles. I asked a guy at Wargaming about this, and his response was that, yeah, it might sound a bit silly, but because it's 10v10, the games are overall faster, and that should make up for it. And that is true, but I never in my entire life understood the point of the qualification games in the first place. The concept of qualification games is that you play 20 games, at least that's what we have now, and then you collect like an average percentage chevron gain, and after those 20 games you will receive bonus battles, which are like daily wins in a way. Carry those with you into the different divisions. So you could make the argument that the qualification games are the most important games, even though the qualification games are where most idiots are playing, which is also kinda silly, because basically you need high chevron gain to be able to get more chevron gain the next division, so you can get bonus battles, so you can get a higher chance of getting more bonus battles. The next division, it just carries on, like the freaking domino effect all over. And what I don't understand with this is that people claim that, yeah, you need to prove how good you are so you can get the correct amount of bonus battles for the divisions. Well, yeah, I get that, but 20 games. I've had qualifications, I think not this one, but the one before that. I believe I lost 16 out of those 20 games. It was one of those days where no matter what I did, before I even got to the front line, everyone was dead and I got rushed, and that was the end of the game. And it happened over and over and over and over. 20 games, it's like you need to prove yourself as a gamer in 20. Well, you can't do it. You usually say that you need to play a tank for hundreds of games before your win rate, your average win rate, will mean anything. And in 20 games, anything can happen. In most people's eyes, what these qualification games are, it is just a time wall to play ranked, which most people don't want to play in the first place. So if I was in charge, I would just give people a set amount of bonus games, let's say 10, and then just let them begin by playing the divisions straight away. You start playing at like division 3 or whatever, or even 4 if you want to compensate for the qualifications, so people get to feel that they're actually getting progress done. Because even though qualifications are supposed to be the most important part of your grind, most people just don't give a crap and just grind meme tanks. Ditch qualification games altogether. This season was only 2 weeks. To most people, that's probably fine. But my main issue here is that this test season was placed in the middle of a summer vacation period. Many are like on summer break, they're on vacation, they're outdoors camping, whatever the crap. And then you smash in an event like this that only lasts for 2 weeks. I think it's kinda dumb. But then most people be like, oh, but I grinded through ranks in just a few days, it's fine, EdvinE. Yes, so did I. I believe I completed this test ranked season in maybe 3-4 sessions. I was grinding like a mad lad because I've been away from home on vacation these few weeks. And I just grinded the whole way through in just a few evenings. But the problem is here is that ranked as a system rewards players who play over a longer period of time, again because of bonus battles. I pick like maybe 5 really good tier 10 tanks, I play those, I get my daily win in that, and then I stop playing, because then I will increase my average chevron gain, and when I complete a division, I will get even more bonus battles. So I basically play maybe 5 wins per day, and then I don't play anymore. So if you have the entire period to play, you're gonna do absolutely fine, you're gonna end up in Gold League and be a freaking hero. But if you just have a few days to complete this thing, you're gonna have to absolutely wreck your chevron gain, and instead of ending up in gold, you might end up in silver or bronze, because you had to play through the whole event in just a few days instead of over 2 weeks, as an example. However, the counter argument is, if you would just remove bonus battles and let's say reduce chevrons in half to complete the event, the flip of that coin would be that everyone would just play the same tanks over and over again, because the bonus battle meme is mainly put in place to encourage people to play different tanks, which I like. It doesn't really matter how you do it, the end result is shit.
At least ranked is getting better for each iteration. They are actively trying to make the game better, they're listening to feedback, and it seems like they are actually implementing the feedback that the players are suggesting, which is nice. But the problem is that the game mode is flawed to begin with. Like the base concept is just shit. Like, even if you polish this shit to like a perfect ball of shit, it's still gonna be a ball of shit. Like, you're still like playing against your team in a team-based game. Compare ranked to Clan Wars, for example, where you have 15 players of the same team versus 15 players of another team, or, you know, a clan. And it's actually a team-based effort. You win as a team, you lose as a team. It's not the individual plays that really shine here, it's the actual team effort. If you look at this and then look at ranked, where you're just trying to grind for chevrons for your own gain, you don't give a shit about your own team. What happens with this chevron system in play is that most people, they adapt their play style as to not lose chevron instead of trying to gain chevrons. And with this mindset in this ranked game mode, where everybody's playing so selfish, it just becomes just a toxic battlefield. It's not fun, there's no teamwork, everybody's just playing Like, they're just hiding and not actively trying to win the game because they're afraid of losing these chevron points.
Because in a lot of games, especially in the lower ranks, before you get into the first division and leagues, there will be so many players who just instantly take up like a sniping position, because they just assume that my team sucks, I'm gonna snipe and get some easy damage and at least not lose a chevron. There are too many people with that mindset, and in a 10v10, if you have 2 or 3 people with that mindset and the enemy team has 0 or 1, well, the game is already decided. This is a team-based game, but you need to play for your own good in ranked, and it just doesn't work.
People jokingly say that their random battles are 1 versus 29 players, but in ranked, this is actually true. Or well, in this version of ranked, it's 1 versus 19, I guess. Yeah. But it's still the same bullshit.
And it also punishes winning plays. I have lost count on games where I have almost single-handedly won by being the one that takes the hits, for example, or making a stupid scout run or whatever. I do something that has to be done, and then I die for it, or I lose a shitload of health for it, and the game doesn't know that I made a game-winning play, and as a result, yeah, maybe I won the game, but I didn't end up in the top percentage, I ended up in the bottom percentage, and because of that, I didn't get any chevron at all, which results in the next game, where I end up in a similar situation. I'm gonna play like a selfish dick in a team-based game.
If you manage to play through this shitfest, you will receive a Bond Turbo, which is in many people's eyes, they were like, oh my god, that's so epic, Wargaming, props on you for giving us an epic reward. I was looking at that in that way at first, but then I realized that it's gonna be extremely toxic in the long run for Clan Wars players, because in Clan Wars, it's mostly about taking key positions as fast as possible. Because in Clan Wars, it's usually the higher ground, you know. I have the higher ground, don't try it, you know, that meme. It's actually extremely relevant in Clan Wars. You want to take a key position where you can have the higher ground above all the other enemy players, and you want to take that key position as fast as possible. Like, for example, on mines, you know, rush the hill, the meme. So if one team has that Bond Turbo, and the other team doesn't, you have lost the game, basically. So this means that you have to play this ranked game mode, unlock this Bond Turbo, you put it on your chieftain, because you also need a chieftain to be competitive in Clan Wars. Bond Turbo is gonna make Clan Wars extremely one-sided if you don't get it.
I think this also proves in a way how bad ranked is as a gaming experience. I've said this a million times, but if Wargaming reduced the rewards or just got rid of it together, made ranked like a bragging rights type of game, no one would play it. The only reason people play ranked is because of the rewards. So I think that they always have this huge carrot, like please play ranked, and maybe that's a sign that ranked just isn't a good mode.
We talked a little bit about this by the end of our Tier 10 is bad video. So if you wanna hear more about our suggestions about ranked or Tier 10 in general, you can watch that video. Short conclusion, it's nice that Wargaming is actively trying to make positive changes for the mode, and they have. But the problem is that ranked from the beginning is shit. Basically not a mode that you can save at this point. I think you can just polish it to being less than bad, I guess.
Oh well, Zwhatsh, over to the next topic.
Hit points panel. So they have implemented so that you can visually see how much hit points your entire team has and the enemy team has, depending on if you have seen them, spotted them in game or not. And you can also see them on the map in the bottom right, like as small icons, like circles on the map, which is very nice. It can get a little bit cluttered on the minimap, especially if you have a small screen, but it's a nice piece of information that you probably want to have. Small feedback would probably be that maybe they can make the hit bars or the circles a little bit thinner, and maybe make them a bit more distinguishable compared to like the hit markers, the artillery hit markers that also appear. Because
currently you have the render range, you have max view range, actual view range, proximity range, you have the HP bars and the artillery strikes on the minimap. I might be missing something. That's a lot of circles on the map, and altogether it can be pretty cluttered. We like it, but it would be nice if Wargaming could maybe take some feedback from the community and maybe try and, as Zwhatsh said, extinguish them from each other a little bit.
We do think it's really nice that they are actually implementing like features that were previously mods. Speaking of mods that have been implemented to the game, we also have the new Commander's Camera / Tactical View. Finally, Wargaming, it took you a while.
And basically what that mod does, it lets you zoom out further. And this has been a bit controversial because a lot of people think that this gives you an unfair advantage because you can use it to have a look around corners where your enemy without that mod won't be able to see. For example, have a look like where is he pointing his gun, and if he's pointing the other way, you might be able to make a dash for it. But now, thank God, it's not the exact same as the mod, but you have the commander camera that you can scroll out to, and then you can scroll out even more. You get the tactical view kind of view mode, which is more or less the same thing. And if you don't like it, you don't need to enable it in the settings. And I just think more mods are better, especially when you have the options to enable and disable them. So more of that stuff, Wargaming, and it also makes the game more fair because now people won't be able to trash talk people using the zoom out mod because now it's available for everyone. Obviously, this is the biggest and the best change that Wargaming have done in this update: the mode selector window. Me and Zwhatsh, we have actually been wanting something like this since we started playing because the previous battle selection mode didn't make much sense as a beginner. It was tiny, it didn't say much. And here it's very clear what you are doing, what you're getting, what the rewards are, yada yada yada. I believe there was a Recon window here a few days ago, Zwhatsh. What happened to that?
The Recon mode, the idea was very nice. You had a few maps available to you that has never been available in any other mode before. And these are maps that Wargaming wants to implement to the actual game in the future, basically. So they have implemented this new Recon mode to make you test these new maps. And with the feedback that they receive from the player base as they test new maps in this Recon mode, they might be able to do changes to the maps for their actual release into the game. If they even get released, maybe they scrap the maps entirely because of the player feedback. So this is basically kind of like a mini test server within the live server. I think it's a good thing because one of Wargaming's weakest sides is their map design philosophy. So it's pretty nice that we can actually give them some feedback to the Wargaming staff this way.
Put every map in Recon mode!
Yes, actually, yes, honestly. Edwin mentioned the game mode is gone from the mode selection window that we talked about. So you could pick a tank, a tier 8, a tier 9 or tier 10 tank. Tier 10 was pretty much the best option because you usually ended up in top tier matchmaking basically. So what's kind of wanky that way. One thing they also fucked up is that you could play tier 8 premium matchmaking tanks in this mode, which you are not supposed to be able to do because tier 8 premium matchmaking tanks are not supposed to face tier 10 tanks, which they could do in this mode. And because of that, they had to shut down the entire mode for some reason.
This is typically Wargaming. In almost all other modes, apart from randoms, you have some vehicles that you can't select. For example, in 7v7 and ranked, you can't pick reward tanks. For example, it says like not suitable for this mode. Would it have been that hard, Wargaming, to just make that for premium matchmaking tanks until you get your shit together?
I think the most ironic part of this was that I actually played my KV5 in a game and ended up in a low tier game, obviously, and I got top experience that game. So. And the final topic of this fantastic video is the new battle pass. We wanted to mention this in this video because it's not like they have rehauled the new battle pass system. It's the same as the last one. It's 3 tanks you can choose. But the thing that we wanted to highlight about the battle pass is that the tokens you earn in the mode, that token shop, it's still the same as the last battle pass, which is good in a way and bad in a way, because if you own some tokens from the last battle pass, you can still spend those in combination with the new ones that you will gain in this battle pass and still buy some new ones. But we think the bad thing about this is that they didn't tell us about this in the first battle pass. Many players probably bought a tank that they probably didn't want because they were afraid that if they didn't spend their tokens in that battle pass, they would waste them. That's all the topics, people. We believe this patch is generally a positive change to the game. Many people seem to come with the opinion that, oh my god, Wargaming is destroying the game. Like the artillery changes are, in our opinion, our biased opinion, they are good. The HE, both bad and good, but we think it will be a good change for the future of World of Tanks if they're planning to do other changes down the line. Ranked, it's an optional mode for the most part. Doesn't really affect the rest of the game, so whatever your opinion about that mode is, it's never gonna really affect the major masses, really. The interface changes, they are excellent. The new camera is excellent. The mode selection window is excellent. The Recon mode is good if they can make it work. Battle Pass, I mean, generally good, but you know, it's always Wargaming's typical 2 steps forwards, 1 step backwards. But we don't think this patch is like destroying the game. But we can definitely understand the people who thinks that way.
Maybe there's something that we completely missed. I'm sure there are a lot of things that we missed in this video. Let us know. You maybe have something on your own, on your mind that you want to share with us. Make sure to drop that down below, not only to boost the YouTube algorithm, but because we do genuinely love reading all of your comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can if they're worth responding to, that is. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, but if you watched this far, I really hope that you did
that like button. Fuck up. Keep looking forward to the really thick video we're gonna release in the near future.
I thought this video was gonna be like a small one, but if this one is the small video, then holy shit, chat. Yeah, don't miss out on that on the next one, people. Like and subscribe, ring that bell, support us on Patreon, like us on Twitch, all that shit. See you next time.